Welcome everyone. This is the 24th episode of the Do No Evil, Speak No Evil show, where I interview awesome individuals making a positive local impact. I'm your host, Blair Neher, aka the Chief Primate. Today my guest is Ben King. Ben is the creator and founder of Armor Down. Armor Down is a nonprofit which helps veterans transition back to civilian life through mindfulness. So welcome, Ben. Thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, hey, it's an honor to be here, and I really appreciate you calling yourself the Chief Primate because I feel like I can fit right in.
Yeah, we had a great conversation before, so I'm really looking forward to this, man.
Yeah, me too.
So let's get into it, man. So right away, I always like to ask their story, their why, and what led you to create Armor Down.
More than anything, it was just coming to experience the fact that life is hard. It's just really tough, and my story includes trauma as a young kid. My story includes trauma as being a member of the military, getting blown up. And my life still includes really tough stuff. And so ultimately, Armor Down was just a way to kind of explain and help people recognize that tough stuff's going to come and it's going to show up in lots of ways. And especially if you're trained to be a warrior, there's ways to think about how to respond to tough things as a civilian that your military training kind of left out. And so, ultimately, the reason I came to teach Armor Down and help people armor down is to help people handle the fact that life is hard and life has got a lot of really tough things involved in it, and there's ways that are better than others to manage that.
Right on. So if you don't mind sharing, tell us, a lot of what you do helps people with, PTSD or PTS, and
yeah.
I think you're uniquely qualified to speak on the topic to what happened to you overseas.
Sure. So, ultimately, one way to think about PTSD is to think about it in terms of the potential for the shadow to dominate. So, it's just a way to think about PTSD, potential for the shadow to dominate. And the shadow is the kind of stuff that, can really kind of show up in difficult ways. And so I went to war because I really found that I thought that I could be this strong person that could not be vulnerable if I could prove myself in war and prove myself as a warrior. And so ultimately my life led me to Iraq, and I got deployed in April of 2006, 2007, and when I got blown up on New Year's Eve of 2006, I thought I had proven myself capable of handling whatever the world could throw at me, because I figured, all right, I'm a warrior. I've proven myself by getting blown up, and so what could possibly stand in my way after this experience? And everything. I mean, there's just this reality to life that includes the shadow, the toughness, the shame, the doubt, the worry, the fear, despair, suicidal thoughts. I mean, that's all part of what it is to be alive. And as a trained warrior, my thought process included the notion that I could eliminate that. And that's what made dealing with the shadow of the human experience so tough, is when I...
By sheer will, right?
Right.
Just will it away.
Just tough it out. And in the military, that's what you're taught to do, and it is effective. Like it works to be downrange or to be in a situation where, a first responder is a similar situation, where you have to go into a situation and you have to come out of that with the mission complete, regardless of what goes on with you. And so that means that you got to go into your shadow. You got to go into violence. You got to go into pain. You got to go into suffering, and you just got to keep pushing. And in the military, that makes a lot of sense. As a first responder, that makes a lot of sense. As even like a caregiver. Let's expand the conversation to not just include the veteran. To go into a place where you have to survive and move forward under the most difficult of situations is what's required to move forward inside the shadow. Now, you cannot live that way. You cannot live inside that space, because all the things that make life worth living are in the light. And if you're stuck in the shadow, or you're kind of in there as just a way of being, you don't know how to get out, all the things that make life worth living are going to be absent in your life, and it's just going to really, really pull from you.
Okay. So when did Armor Down start, and what was the factor, the last factor that did it for you? The camel, the straw that broke the camel's back, per se.
Yeah. So here's what I know, right? I know this for fact. Human beings have what are called central nervous systems. Okay, it's this nervous system that operates in ways that you don't even have to worry about, right? So it's called the central nervous system, or the autonomic nervous system, because it's running all the time, whether you're thinking about it or not. It's happening. Now, that central nervous system has two sides. Okay, it has the sympathetic side, which is, you can think of as the warrior side, which is the fight or flight side, the power side, the things that get you fired up, good to go. And then what it also has is called the relaxation response side, or the parasympathetic side, which is the side that settles you down, and the side that calms you, and the side that's, really all about connecting with others and things like that. So really, really simply, what started Armor Down is I did not know that there was this other side. I had no idea that there was this parasympathetic side, and it's actually called the relaxation response. It's this guy named Dr. Herbert Benson identified this side of the central nervous system. He's a Harvard-trained scientist. He identified the central nervous system side, the parasympathetic side, or the relaxation response, years ago, and put it out there for the world to see. And so when I came back from Iraq, I was really, really struggling. I was always fired up. I couldn't sleep. My body was in pain all the time. I was constantly tense. I was very, very emotionally reactive. I mean, my internal world was completely out of my control. And so over time, I learned that there was this other side of the spectrum, right? And when I learned that there was another side of the spectrum called the relaxation response, or the parasympathetic side of the nervous system, I was like, how do I share this with other people? And you can't just go out and say, I found no effect of going out and saying, hey, here's this scientific reality, you got to do this.
Right.
And it just didn't fit. So the thing was, what's out there? What can be used? How can we actually make this into something like concrete that's useful? And just through luck, I got this opportunity to practice what's called mindful meditation. And mindful meditation is just a style of meditation that includes someone kind of guiding you through a way of calming your body down and getting into, you got it, the parasympathetic side of your nervous system, the relaxation response. To get into that space, one way to do it, it's not the only way, just one way to do it was called mindful meditation. And so when I learned how to do this for the first time, I couldn't believe it. It was so simple. It wasn't far out. It wasn't like the way I'd imagined meditation was. It was just this really simple, effective method to do what I knew science that I needed to do, which was come out of fight or flight, come out of the parasympathetic, come out of the sympathetic side of the nervous system. You could call that the shadow side, right? We're using these words all the time. The sympathetic side is the side that gets you fired up, to come out of that and into the relaxation response, which is the parasympathetic side of the nervous system. You can use this practice called mindful meditation. And so what I wanted to do is I was like, all right, I got a bunch of warriors out here that aren't going to respond to mindfulness meditation. They're not going to respond to relaxation response. They're not going to respond to all this stuff. What they are going to respond to are effective applications of tool sets that can be useful. And so that's how Armor Down began. Armor Down was a way to talk about this stuff without getting people like, nah, it's BS, or I don't know about that. It was a way to talk about stuff inside of the warrior's wheelhouse. And it was just a way to do it that I guess, hadn't been done before, and make it just more palatable for that warrior who knows what it's like to be fired up all the time and knows that it's useful, right? It's effective. It's not a bad thing to be armored up, to be fired up. You need it. And so to show people that, hey, there's this way to shift that, and here's how you do it, and it's not anything far out. It's really simple. It's really scientific based. That's how Armor Down came about. It was just this real simple idea of let's take what we know scientifically, but apply it in a way that makes sense to the community that we're targeting.
Because I'm sure it's not the first thing a veteran or a military guy wants to hear is about touchy-feely stuff to fix problems. I'm sure that's not.
Well, the word to use is, I think, is vulnerable. Like the idea is that there are parts of your body that operate, parts of your being that operate at their highest level when you have armored down, when you are not trying to protect yourself, when you're not trying to be strong or you have to be ready or put the mission first. When you're in a place of vulnerability, which, I mean, even to say the word vulnerable kind of gives me this kind of feeling of, ugh, I don't even like to say it. Like, I don't want to ever be vulnerable, right? I don't want that.
Right.
But in reality, that's where you get the stuff, the connection that makes you feel the best. Like, and we just don't talk about it. Like the military community doesn't really talk about it, but we live it all the time. I mean, when you're not in sector and you're just with your buddies or you're with your team, like the way warriors armor down is by doing all the things that are kind of like touchy-feely or vulnerable, but we just do it in like this meathead kind of way. Like we pound on each other, we give each other a hard time, we joke, we horse around, but we do that because our armor is down. We know we're in a safe environment, we're in the barracks, we're with our crew, we're with our team, and we don't have to be on point. And that's when you get that feeling, you get that warm, fuzzy feeling. There's actually a name for it in the Army, it's called a warm fuzzy. The thing is, the difficult part is when you go into a civilian world and you don't have that structure anymore, it's hard to recognize how to get that warm fuzzy feeling back. And what that warm fuzzy feeling is your central nervous system has been like, okay, I know I don't have to be armored up here. I can be chill, I can be relaxed, I can just armor down, I can be relaxed. And that's called the parasympathetic nervous system. That's the relaxation response. And when that happens, there's just this wonderful flow, this back and forth. There's even a chemical element that gets released into your body. It's called oxytocin. It's a hormone that gets released into your system. That does not get released when you're ready to kill. That system is shifted. It's not on. And if you want to feel that warm fuzzy feeling, that's a release of the hormone oxytocin, and that's what makes you feel connected to other people, and that's what makes life worth living. That connection, right? To live a life at the edge of fear and to be willing to be a warrior is very noble and honorable, but you're living that life for something, and that something that you're living that life for is family, friends, for them to be the best versions of themselves, for them to find the most meaningful, wonderful, awe-inspiring aspects of life. And if you cannot see that, and for a lot of warriors with PTSD and just a lot of warriors in general, they just can't see it. They can't get past the armor. And then it's tough going if it's like that.
So talk about some of the programs that Armor Down has.
Sure. So like I mentioned, the big thing was to create ways for the warrior community to recognize the value of these practices, mainly mindfulness, in a way that would be immediately understandable, right? And so just real quick, the practice of mindfulness is very, very simple. It's simply choosing to put your attention on one thing, right? To just be completely focused in what's going on right now in the present moment. That's really it. So mindfulness can be looked at as a philosophy and all this other kind of stuff, but ultimately it's just a skill, right? It's kind of like reading. You learn how to read, you learn how to be mindful, focused on one thing. So if that's basically all mindfulness is, then how do we get the warrior community to participate with it? And so, like I mentioned, we tried the whole scientific approach. This is what science says. If science says it, you should do it. But that wasn't that effective. What was very effective was tying it to things that we knew the warrior community would find meaningful. And so the first thing we did was connect the act of being mindful to honoring the fallen. And that came about in just an amazing kind of turn of events that ended up leading us to a relationship with Arlington National Cemetery and the Women's Memorial at Arlington National Cemetery. And so we created this program called Mindful Memorial Day, where we attempted to honor every service member who's died since 9/11 with what's called a mindful moment of gratitude. And a mindful moment of gratitude is very simple. It's just honoring the fallen with your fullest attention, right? And to a warrior, to anybody really, that's what they deserve. When you're going to offer a moment of gratitude to a service member who's given their life on our behalf, on your behalf, then you should do so with your complete attention. And so that wasn't a hard sell. It was totally within everybody's kind of frame of reference to be like, okay, that makes perfect sense. And I mean, it was still a bit of we had to get over a little bit of a hump, because for some kind of reason, people feel like there's like this resistance to kind of engaging with the internal environment and the mind and the thought process. And so, getting over that has taken a little bit, but it really hasn't been. It hasn't limited us. It's just been something that we just have to keep putting in front of people. And so anyway, for the 6th year in a row, we'll be conducting Mindful Memorial Day at Arlington National Cemetery, where we use mindfulness to mindfully honor every service member who's died since 9/11. And this year, as it being the 6th year, there's now Mindful Memorial Days taking place in Virginia, New Hampshire, Washington State, and Arlington. So it's grown, and people get it. When you honor a fallen service member, you do it with your fullest attention. So that's one program. Now, the next program that we've created is called Mindful Marksmanship. And that's a program where we show warriors how their military marksmanship training is essentially the same set of skills that you could also use for mindful meditation. So when you fire a firearm, if you know about firearms, your awareness will probably include something to the effect of front sight focus, or completely focusing down the barrel from the rear sights to the front, and that's where that's where your bullet's going to go. So front sight focus is essentially the same thing as mindfulness. You've taken everything that's around you and put all your attention onto one thing. And it's that focus that puts the round where you want it to go and also keeps you safe. And so what we've done is we've created a program that just shows the warrior that they're already well versed in this skill, and that they can, shift what they've learned to be a marksman into learning how to be mindful. And so they just a small shift in their marksmanship training, learn how to be mindful, and then we show how that relationship correlates to life outside of the range. So mindful marksmanship helps people recognize that they already know what they need to know, and they can apply what they know to psychological and emotional control outside of the range.
Okay. But let's say a veteran does the mindful Memorial Day, and then they want to do more. Do you have meditation programs or things like that?
So we have programs that we use to help people identify how would they like to armor down and what will work best for them. And so we do real simple programs like learning how to practice mindfulness while walking, learning how to practice mindfulness while in seated meditation. Yoga is also a big one. So the way Armor Down works is you start to interact with us, and what we help you do is recognize first that mindfulness is a skill, right? It's just a skill that you need to apply. And then the second thing we help you understand is that you need to apply it on a regular basis. And so we don't go out and say you need to do this or you need to do that. You just first need to recognize that it's a skill that you already know that you have, and now you got to apply it. The next thing we help people figure out is how to do it on a regular basis. And typically that involves helping people just identify what they already like doing, okay? So say you have a dog, say you are like to cook, or say you like to, go on walks by the river or something like that. The key is to recognize that there is some part of your life that gives you a sense of settledness, gives you a sense of calm. And then what we do is we teach you how to apply mindfulness to it. And the way you apply mindfulness is very simple. The way you practice it over time takes discipline, but the way you apply it inside any given moment is very simple. And we have a very, very simple two-step process that informs everything we do from Mindful Memorial Day to Mindful Marksmanship to how we teach our students how to apply mindfulness in their daily lives.
It's interesting you said the marksmanship is similar to mindfulness, and it's kind of the same thing whenever I go shooting. It's the same thing whenever I do sparring.
Mm-hmm.
There's some kind of mental flush that happens afterwards because I'm so focused on what's going on.
Yes.
I'm overly timid around firearms, even though I do like to shoot them or whatever, but I'm like super focused on safety,
Yep.
super focused on what I'm doing,
Yep.
to the point of when I get done, it's like everything that's been constantly running through my brain has
Yes.
kind of been flushed, and I kind of get a fresh start. The same way with sparring, when somebody's trying to choke you or break your arm, you better be paying attention to what's
Yes.
going on and not have your mind somewhere else. So I mean, we're talking about the same thing there.
Yes. And so what you're doing when you're engaging with your body, let's talk about what it is to be mindless, all right? So to be mindless is to essentially let your mind just take over, right? And so to be mindless, during a conversation with someone is to not be focused with them, is to, it'd be like looking at your phone or thinking about what's going to happen later. And so what happens when your mind is doing that is you're always in a position of what's coming next. You're not being present. You're not focused on the present moment. You're moving into the past or you're moving into the future. And the biggest problem with that is that you have no idea if what you're remembering about the past is fully accurate, and what you're expecting about the future is ever going to come to pass. So you're constantly in this state of unsuredness, ungroundedness, and that's what it is to be mindless. It's just to let the systems run you. And so to be mindful and to be dialed in is to be completely organized in your focus and in your body inside the present moment. And so what you're describing about being in kind of this flow, right, completely dialed in, is you're describing what it means to be completely grounded and mindful. And your system is designed to operate at that way, in that level. It's not flipped, it's not shifted, it's not split. It's completely dialed in. And when you're dialed in, your system's operating at its highest level. And so when you get to do that and you get to be kind of fully focused, your body rewards you. Your body rewards you with kind of a sense of calm and a sense of peace, especially at the end of this complete focus. And so you see that what you're describing is what you see in CrossFit. What you're describing is what you see in yoga. What you're describing is what you see after you do a lot of sprints. Like you're really, really pushing your body to a high level, and then at the end you get this kind of flush. Now, the only thing I would add to this conversation is that one thing to be mindful of is that as you get older, right, as your body ages, the high intensity levels that you use to be mindful and to get you to that calm peace and kind of get that stuff out there will become harder and harder to achieve over time. And so part of what's nice about these other practices, the soft practices, is that they afford you a chance to continue that same level of, heightened awareness, heightened engagement.
Excuse me.
But you'll be able to do it over and over and over again for a long time.
Sustainability. Awesome, man. So let's say I'm a veteran and I want to get on board. How do I go about doing that?
Sure. So if you're a veteran in the Richmond area, I encourage you to be a part of the Wounded Warrior Project. Right now we're exclusively offering Mindful Marksmanship for this. There's going to be a spring session, a summer session, and then a larger fall session. So here's your chance to get if you're a veteran, Wounded Warrior Project is open to anybody. So go ahead and get involved with the Wounded Warrior Project, and you can be a part of our exclusive program with the Wounded Warrior Project in the spring, the summer, and then the fall. So if you want to get involved with mindful marksmanship, as of right now, you got to go through the Wounded Warrior Project. However, if you want to get involved with Mindful Memorial Day, we're going to be having a major event at Arlington over Memorial Day.
Okay.
So I encourage you to be part of that. If you want to help out down in Richmond and being part of the Richmond Mindful Memorial Day, reach out through Armor Down Facebook page, or reach out through Mindful Armor Down Facebook page, and we'll respond within a couple hours to show you how you can get dialed in. And so that's the big thing that's coming up soon. That's coming up at the end of May.
Okay. Yeah, one of the questions I had for you is events. So there's one of them. So on the alternative side, how can people help? How can the average everyday Joe help? Is it just donations, or is it volunteering?
Yeah, definitely donations. We'll always take donations. So Armor Down created the Mindful Memorial Day Foundation in 2014. It's 501c3, so all your donations are totally tax deductible. But yeah, so we could definitely use that. Another thing to think about, right? And this is the issue that I think is significant, is to recognize that mental and behavioral health is now just a part of like the American narrative. Like it's the veteran community, as typically happens, so goes the military, so goes the civilian. The military community has kind of had first kind of emphasis on mental and behavioral health, largely because that's where a lot of the funding went. We've been at war for 17 years, and so what we've experienced are lots and lots of veterans coming back with these really complex mental and behavioral health issues. And so initially all the funding kind of went to the military, and showed all this stuff, how it works. And then afterwards, what kind of worked into the private sector is now all these mental and behavioral health practices, mindfulness being at their foundation, that have shown up. And so the real way to help, right, is to recognize that these skills are fundamental, and that when you're interacting with a veteran and you're interacting with someone of the warrior community, recognize that you have a central nervous system that has light and shadow like the veteran does. The veteran's light and shadow may be different because their life includes going into combat or being in the darkest shadow that there is. But that doesn't mean that they're fundamentally different from you. You and a veteran are far more alike in every way than you are different. And so there's this kind of idea that because they've served or because they've seen this or they've seen that I can't relate, or that they're just not like me, or something like that. If that ever kind of shows up, or my experience isn't as kind of worthy of awareness as theirs, I encourage you to just be aware of that and just recognize that there's far more uniting us than there are difference. And what unites us is this aspect of vulnerability. To be armored down, to go into the parasympathetic side of your nervous system, is to be in a space in the civilian world without judgment, without like, oh, I can't talk about that because they're this, or they don't know about me, so I can't do that. That's judgment. Like, that's armor, right? In the military world, armor is tactics, discipline, physical body armor, weapons. That's what armor is. In the civilian world, armor is judgment and expectation. So when you go into a situation and you have expectations about this and that outcome, or you make judgments around people based on their appearance or their past or whatever, you're putting armor up. You're putting armor up, and you're creating an environment where you will not be as authentic and real with that person as you could be. And to be authentic and real, to be vulnerable, to be open, to be in a space where you're acknowledging each other's humanity is the space of greatest reward. It's the space where you get to feel connected. It's the space where your body releases that hormone called oxytocin. It's a space where you really get to feel a sense of community. And that's what we need. What we need more than anything is a sense that we are all in this together. We are part of this really, really awesome country, the United States of America. And yeah, we've got a lot of differences, but the thing that we all have in common is that we got this space inside of us. It's got lots of names for it, but that space inside of us exists in you as well as the person next to you. And that's the space that when it lights up and you're around someone else and it lights up too, you both light up more because of each other. Yep. And when that happens, that's where unity comes in, and that whole e pluribus unum, out of many we are one, that's that whole point. Like that's what we're getting at, is that we're more powerful together, and that the stuff that's separating us, especially now as a civilian world, is expectations and judgment. Those things that are separating us have their value, but largely you're more alike than you are than unalike to the veteran community.
So recognizing that it's not us versus them, but we're that much different at the core. It's a lot of it's the same.
Yeah, well, you got that's the hardest part about all this stuff. Is like, I mean, I hate to bring up like the latest kind of politics and things, but there's a lot of people who believe a lot of very, very strong feelings about particular people on one side of the aisle versus the other. And it doesn't matter, what's said or what's proven or what's not proven. It's like people have kind of fixated on this identity of I'm this and the other is that. And so that's armor, right? That's creating armor. Now, even when that identity or that this or that becomes disproven, or that so-and-so actually didn't do this, or so-and-so could have done that but didn't really do it. When those things fall away, when the expectations or the judgments fall away, a lot of people are still left with that same feeling, well, I have to be this or I have to be that. That judgment, that armor is getting in the way of being present and focused. It's taking place in the past, or it's taking place in expectations of the future. So when you get with people, you're armored up. You're not being the kind of authentic self that's available to you when you're focused and present. And so you miss opportunities. It's just not as effective.
Okay. Did you hear the recent story from the UK military? There's a commander caught on tape, and he's berating this guy that is really struggling with mental health.
Yeah.
Did you read about that?
No, but
he basically just said, there's no such thing as mental health.
Right.
Buck up.
Right.
Do you think that problem is, propagated while you're in the military, even at like that high leadership point?
So,
or is that just a random example?
It's very real. The reality inside of a combat environment is that if your emotions get the better of you inside of a combat environment, that can mean the death of you and your team. And so that is a very real thing. And that's all the more reason why mental and behavioral health needs to be a thing, other than what it has been, is just do it, right? The reason why you learn about mental and behavioral health, the reason why you practice mindfulness, is to become aware that there are times when you can be vulnerable and there are times when you can't. And if you're in the military and you're emotionally falling apart and you have to be kind of dialed in to get the job done, then your team's not going to trust you, and your group is not going to be able to operate at high levels. So for an officer to berate a soldier for being overly emotional and not being able to handle their stuff, to me that's something that we have to recognize as a reality. Now, that said, in the future, as this becomes more ingrained in our culture and in our understanding, the next generation of officers will be more aware of how to handle that situation without compounding it and making it worse. Because the problem that way of kind of approaching the situation is, you're just a weakling, or da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah.
That feeds the suicide narrative, right? So the suicide narrative is, I can't handle my stuff, I'm not good enough, I'm not strong enough, I'm too weak. And the problem with that mindset is that it drills down into the place where the darkness, the evil, the shadow, whatever you want to call it, could take hold. And when that happens, it becomes really hard to get back to the light. So that officer may well have been right from his perspective, right? The leadership perspective. Got it. Got to take care of the... In the military, you're not an individual, right? You're just not. You're part of a unit. And so your unit has to be operational. And if you fail the whole team. So that's a no-go. Now, in the civilian world, if that's stuck inside of you, that's where you become really, really convinced that you are worthless or you can't handle it. And that's a really, really bad thing. So it's a complex conversation. It's very, very tricky to kind of navigate this reality. But in the military, you have to be fully dialed in. You got to be ready to go. In the civilian world, you've got to learn that there's a way to turn it on and a way to turn it off.
Because the first thing, your first reaction is, what a jerk, and you're obviously, that's what I was thinking, you're gonna drive this guy to kill himself.
Yep.
But on the other hand, it's a very tough job that you gotta buck up for.
Yeah.
In a lot of cases.
Yeah.
But if somebody is that far, out of their normality, or not out of their mind, but just that far out of where they should be, then they gotta pull that person.
Absolutely. Yeah, without a doubt. So again, and that's like the military has a really, really hard time dealing with the things that make it vulnerable, right? So for a long time, the focus on how to not be vulnerable is to just be stoic, to just push through, to be a hard charger, and to just not give up. And that makes perfect sense. I mean, the big chunk of our identity, our military identity, is built around our successes in World War II, right? We came together as a nation in World War II and whooped some ass. Like, we just did. And so, I mean, you just think about your own life. If you've done something really, really well, and you're moving forward, you're going to look to that as an example of how best to move forward, right? And so that's what we did, and that was a time and a place and at a cultural evolution that worked really, really well. Now we've evolved from that, and we're in this new space. We're in this new space where we're just kind of at war all the time, like we're just kind of always at war. And that same mentality, it kind of speaks back to what we were talking about earlier. Puts us in a position where it's not sustainable. Like it's not sustainable to stay entirely military combat focused for your entire life. You just cannot do it. And so we're in this new space where we have to take what we've learned and we've got to evolve it to include awareness around mental health and awareness around vulnerability. Now, we're still dealing with the realities of where we come from, our identity, what our history is. And so that's going to include this deep aversion to anything that makes us vulnerable. We don't even want to look at it. I mean, one of the biggest vulnerabilities in the military right now is military sexual trauma. Military sexual trauma is just massive. It is a massive vulnerability that our military is just having to deal with on a regular basis.
So what do you mean by that?
So the
actual term, is that sexual abuse that's happened within the military?
Right.
Or?
So military sexual trauma is a kind of a across the board. It's not just for females. It's not just perpetrated by men. Military sexual trauma is kind of an offshoot of the fact that we are not well adept at handling kind of the vulnerabilities that are implicit to being a warrior. When we are in positions of power, when we are in positions of authority, one way to not feel vulnerable yourself is to externalize it. Put it on someone else. And so to externalize what you feel inside of you is to move into a space where if you feel bad, one way to not feel bad is to make someone else feel bad. If you feel weak, the one way to not feel weak is to make someone else feel weak. So you just put it on someone else. And when you do that, you're interacting with your own vulnerability in an unskillful way. And the problem with doing that on kind of a grand scale is that there's an environment of not being accountable. And so you as an individual are in a situation where maybe you're lower enlisted and someone who's a higher authority assaults you in some form or fashion, and you have to say up the chain that this has happened. So you go tell the person up the chain that this has happened. That person goes up the chain to tell them that has happened. And it gets to a point where they go up the chain high enough that the leadership just kind of kills it, right? Now imagine if that's happening on a large scale. Like it's happening in a lot of different places. And it's happening so much that the leadership knows that if they actually come down on it hard, the vulnerability implicit to what's going to happen, if all those people have to be held accountable for, their situation will be they're down 2-3 men per unit, 2-3 warriors per unit. If all the problem that's been evolving over time gets really addressed, then the next thing you know, you're looking at a situation where you're like, I don't even know how we're going to handle this. So we're in this kind of situation where this nastiness, right, is coming up and out. And we're seeing it everywhere. We're seeing in veteran suicides. We're seeing in Vietnam veteran suicides. They're the greatest number of veteran suicides. So the 20 veterans per day. The number of plus 55-year-olds, that's the highest. The most increased rate of veteran suicides is between the ages of, I think it's 18 to 34. So the largest number of people committing suicide are plus 55 years old, so that's Vietnam era. The greatest rate, so the numbers of suicides that have increased the most, that's 18 to 35. And so these are the manifestations, right, of a culture that's going through a kind of a crisis, right? And that crisis centers around vulnerability. Like, you cannot be vulnerable in the military at present understanding. Can't do it. But what if you are? You are vulnerable. You have two sides to the central nervous system. You have this fight or flight side, and you have this relaxation response side. The thing is that when you allow yourself, or when you are constantly focused on just being armored up all the time, being tough all the time, and then vulnerability strikes, right? It shows up, and you have no idea how to handle it, then what are you going to do? Now, I know what I did, right? For me, when vulnerability would strike and I would all of a sudden feel like I didn't know what was going to happen, I was afraid for the future, I didn't know how things were going to be, I externalized it. The first time I externalized it was on my little sister. Like, my family had a tragic accident when I was 10, and we lost my baby brother, who was 2 years old, in a tragic drowning accident. I mean, my life up to that point was just great. Like, I had a wonderful life. And then out of nowhere, boom, like one morning everything's great, and then by the afternoon all my life was just completely gone. Everything I knew was just gone, right? Everything had changed in that moment. Now, if you take out the details of that, and you just say life is going along, doom, 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 and then all of a sudden, massive change. Everything that you thought you knew, everything that you thought was the ground you were standing on is now gone, right? How do you handle that? Well, I handled it by externalizing that feeling. I put it into my sister. I was just terribly cruel to her, you know, and I didn't know I was doing this. I had no idea. It took me almost 30 years to understand that I hated the feeling of being vulnerable so bad that the best way I handled it was, if I felt bad, let's make someone else feel bad.
Your poor little sister was the target.
God, like, I'm still, like, I'll never be able to give her back the torment that I caused.
Really?
I'll never. Like, I made her life just a constant state of, like, unknowing. Like, I was just cruel. It was just a mean kind of thing, and I could be, right? And it wasn't until I realized, like, relatively recently, that I was doing it, that I even realized I was doing it. Like I didn't know. I didn't get it. And that's a weird thing about the human condition, is that we can create self-narratives. We can create judgments that are situated in the past and have expectations in the future, so that we're never actually paying attention to what we're doing.
Yeah.
It's
the biases.
Yeah, and implicit biases, and the cognitive dissonance that we can create for ourselves. I mean, we live in a place, and we are in a place right now in Richmond, Virginia, that was, ground zero for a kind of a way of imagining what it was to be human, that included a hierarchy that was just so strong and so clearly defined that entire groups of people were, made to suffer in dramatic ways, while other groups of people were able to kind of claim a sense of, this is okay, and here's why it's okay, because we're doing it because of this, and we're doing it because of that, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And we created years and decades and generations of cognitive dissonance from what was actually happening and why we thought it was okay and what we thought it could be. It's part of who we are.
Yeah, the self-narratives are something that, changes whole communities and changes whole families, and what you believe versus what actually is. It's something else that tricks our mind plays on us.
Yeah.
And I forget, I was listening to something and it said our perception is affected like almost half by our own memory and our own life.
Yes. Like
how we perceive just a third party situation.
Yes.
And it makes it very tough.
Well, the science,
grounded in reality.
The science behind it's really cool. So if you think about your own head, and you think about the back of your head, like where your spine goes up into the back of your head, that area of your head is the area of the part of your brain that's called like the old brain or the lizard brain, right? It's the part that has like your really basic survival stuff, right? That part of your brain dictates whether or not the area of your brain that processes new information and processes information at the highest level, so like from the broadest, best view, that part of your brain dictates whether or not the bigger part of your brain gets blood or not, right? So you literally have a doorway, right, that goes from this lizard brain into what ultimately comes the prefrontal cortex. So that's the front of your brain, right? So the back of your brain plays a role in what the front of your brain gets access to. Now, if you get triggered in any way, right? So think about identity, like your identity, who you are as a person, your story, where you came from, where you're headed. If that part of you gets triggered, like, nope, that's not me. I'm not. You can't even get to thinking about it. You can't even get to having a memory built around it because you shut that down. Your hippocampus is at the limbic system, right? So that lizard brain dictates the blood that flows into the hippocampus. The hippocampus goes in there, and if you're triggered, the hippocampus is just like off, right? It's just kind of like, so you could be saying the most profound stuff ever, and you couldn't remember it because you've already been triggered. Your lizard brain is on. You're in this like, who the hell is this? This is my identity. I'm da-da-da-da-da-da. Right. That was the hardest part about Armor Down. That was the hardest part about teaching mindfulness, is because you go in, people would hear mindfulness. They would hear yoga. And before you even got to the science of why it's good for you, their identities would be like, nope. And so you couldn't even make that. You cannot do it. It does not matter how reasoned, how smart, how nice signage you have, the delivery, none of that matters unless you can get into that space. You've got to armor down before you can start retaining this new skill set. And if you can't get people to armor down first, right? If you can't get people to feel calm and centered and not under any kind of threat first, you can't make any progress. None. And so that's kind of where it goes back to this idea about these larger systems and vulnerability. The military mindset is associated with a particular way. And if you move into that space and you're confronted with something that's just the opposite of that, then you're going to get this kickoff. You're going to get this kickoff of that lizard brain, that identity just saying, nope, and you can't make it through. Now, here's the thing about, you mentioned that officer berating that younger warrior or that warrior for having a mental health issue or whatever. Chances are that officer knows the deepest, darkest shadows that you could possibly imagine. Because typically what happens when people really, really respond really, really strongly to stuff is that it triggers something about them that they hate.
Yep.
They hate it. I mean, I just know this, and this is kind of the recent phenomenon for me. Like, I didn't realize I was doing what I was doing to my sister until I realized that I was doing the same thing to my dog. Like, I did not understand that when I was really, really getting stressed and a whole lot of things were going on, and it's just all this uncertainty. Everything was ungrounded, so I felt like I was just like, I don't know what's going to happen. I just feel like, oh my gosh, everything's going 1,000 miles a minute. I don't know where to turn. I don't know how this is going to go. I feel really vulnerable. And I just noticed that I was rougher with my dog. Like instead of like patting him on the side and be like, good boy, it was more like I was kind of like hitting him a little hard, like good boy, and just kind of being like rough with him. There was just a roughness that I had. And I noticed right away after about 2 days that he just became a little bit skittish. And I was wondering, I was like, what's that? And then I realized this is my fault.
Yeah.
I am my kind of violence, this part of me that I don't want to deal with, I don't want to interact with. I externalized it. I put it on the dog. And I'm a mindful person. I've been studying mindfulness for years. And it was so kind of deep. This kind of feeling was so kind of down there that I didn't even notice it, and I got it this time. Now, 30 years, I'm not understanding that there's a part of me that I still don't want to. It's like, oh God, I'm not vulnerable. I mean, I'm a warrior. I got a Purple Heart, for Christ's sake. I'm supposed to be able to handle anything.
Yeah.
And here are these things that I'm feeling so uncertain. I'm scared, and it's like I don't know what to do. You know what's a great way not to feel vulnerable? Feel violent, feel angry. That's a great way not to do it. You just mask it with something else. And that's what I was doing. And I used to think about, I used to think about anger from the perspective of anger. I just need to be more attentive to when I feel angry. But what I realized was I need to be more attentive to when I feel vulnerable. And so when that happened, I recognized it, and now I was like, immediately I was like, oh my gosh, I'm putting my vulnerability into the damn dog. And so I cleared that up. I was like, okay, now just very mindful. It felt weird because I was like, I could feel it in my body. It wasn't even a thought. It was like a feeling in my body. So I started being aware of that. And then I was getting into conversations with people, and I was talking to people about vulnerability, just using the word. I mean, I imagine for some people, even hearing the word, it's just like that little lizard brain kicks on, and it's like, yeah, whatever, this guy's, I don't even want to hear about it. But I remember just talking to different people, and we were having conversations, and this one woman was talking about how her father, I think it was her father wasn't involved in their life, but their mother was just very, very, very just hard, just really, really hard. It was a really difficult time. And what they did was as kids, there was 4 kids, they put the feelings that they had, they externalized their feelings into each other. And so there was this really contentious relationship between the kids. Mm-hmm. And so the mom would come down on one of them would come down on the younger kid, and then it would just spiral around. And this woman described a situation where now in her life, she and this one sister can't even interact with each other, and then that sister is doing the same thing to her kids. So it's like this cycle of just nastiness, where there's this part about us that it's the last thing in the world we want to acknowledge. It's the last thing in the world we want to feel. It's the last thing that we ever want to identify with, and whenever it rears its ugly head, we mask it with something and put it onto someone else. And so that, coming to that realization was recent. I mean, I got back from Iraq in 2007, and while I became much more adept at managing my behavior and learning how to do things in a sustainable way and create times where I was armored down, it wasn't until just recently that I really started to see that there were parts about me that were really limiting the type of connections I could have to people, the type of joy that I was capable of having. And when I started to really focus on that piece, that vulnerability piece, things kind of opened up again. And so I was in it felt like I was in a new level of training where everything was kind of fresh again. And I only point that out to say is that there's no end to this. Like you're never going to get to a place where it's like, I got it. Right? I mean, that's that's a very American way of thinking, like the American dream, right? You're going to get this stuff and you're going to get to this place, right? Let me re-articulate the American dream for you. The American dream is to be in America, period. It's right now. The American dream is right now. It's not something you get. It's something that you already have. We are the luckiest people in the world to be American. We live in a nation that's built off of the ideal, not off of how you're born, not off of where you're from, not off of how much money you have, not off of the type of family or tribe you're from. It's just you're American. Now, we got a lot of ways to improve, right? Don't get me wrong. There's still lots and lots of things about America that can be better.
Oh, yeah.
But the dream is, it's now. It's not getting somewhere. It's now.
Just being present as an American.
Yeah, participating as an American.
Wild stuff, man. So, any other events coming up besides the Mindful Memorial Day? What other events do you have planned?
Well, one of the things I'll tell you what. One of the things that I've been doing a lot, just as a kind of a way to just connect with people, share the practice, but at the same time enjoy Richmond, is what I call a mindfulness walk. And so, for any of you out here listening to this broadcast, if you reach out to me before the next couple of weeks or whatever, and let me know that you heard us on this podcast, I'll be happy to guide you on the coolest walk you've ever been through by Bell Island on the James River in downtown Richmond. It's the coolest walk you've ever been on. It's about 1.5 miles. If the water level's low, we get to do a little bit of bouldering, going over rocks, going over really cool stuff. We start at the Tredegar Ironworks by the big cannon by the Tredegar Ironworks. It's the American Civil War Museum down right by the Bell Island. We start there. We cross the Pottersfield Bridge. The Pottersfield Bridge is just this awesome bridge. If you've never been there, check it out. We cross the bridge. They then once we cross the bridge to the other side of the James, we walk across the railroad tracks. Then we get back to Bell Island over another bridge. We get to see the coolest rapids. Richmond just has the best rapids ever. We go around Bell Island, then we come back on the suspension bridge. So you never see the same thing twice. It's a super awesome walk, and the whole time we do it, we talk about what it is to practice mindfulness. So how to choose, right? How to choose to be like, okay, my mind is spinning up like crazy. Let's focus on something in the present moment. Let's get focused. And the cool part about it is the river, being outdoors, being by the water, being by the rapids, it all does a great job at naturally helping people armor down. So if anybody is listening to this podcast, reach out to the Armor Down Facebook page. Let me know that you listen to this podcast. And absolutely, we can do it as a group or individuals. I've done this dozens of times. We'll go on this mindfulness walk and you won't forget it.
I'm going to put the links to both your website and the Facebook page in the description of the video and when the podcast goes out as well.
Cool.
So people can just click right on that. All right, man, that's about all I had. This is your chance to give us any parting words shout outs, other announcements, or anything like that?
All right, so let me just show you what it means to go through a mindful moment. So all you've got to do to begin is focus on something that you know is happening in the present moment. So that's sight, sound, taste, touch, or smell. So since you're listening to this podcast, just for a moment, take a second and just listen for anything that you can hear around you or through the microphone, because we're in an area that has some background noise. So anything that you can hear, just notice it for 1 second. Listen deeply. And then from there, you move into awareness of your body, starting with your feet. So you don't have to change anything, don't have to fix anything. You just notice how your feet are kind of situated underneath you. The key is curiosity. Your mind is a superpowered thing. So if it's curious about something in the present moment, because your sight, sound, taste, touch, smell is always happening in the present moment, it will be focused. Next, your pelvis. See if you can notice the base of your spine at your pelvis. If you're seated, standing, if you're moving around, it doesn't matter. From there, you move up to your core. That's the area above your pelvis but below your ribs. You might even be able to feel the fabric of your clothing on your sides or your lower back, maybe even around your belly button as you breathe. You could just notice. Again, it doesn't matter if you fix or change anything. It's just putting your attention on something happening in the present moment. Next, shoulder blades. Okay, your shoulder blades are behind your heart, but they're connected to your heart space. So some people, you just need to move them, to feel it. Other people, you can feel it by just breathing and seeing if you can feel your side ribs actually move as you breathe. Now from there, the next place you send your awareness is your throat. Now you just notice what's going on in your throat. You maybe you swallow, or maybe you have a tight jaw. It doesn't really matter. You're just being curious. And then finally, you get to the tip top of your head. That's the top of your spine. If you can be attentive to the top of your head, top of your spine, then you might be able to feel when you take your next full inhale and exhale, how your whole body moves when you breathe. Your whole body moves. So check this out. Anytime you want, you can armor down by just noticing how your whole body moves when you breathe. So step 1, become attentive to what you know is happening around you, sight, sound, taste, touch, smell. Step 2, go through your body, starting with your feet, going up your spine. Then the last thing you do is take a full breath and see how it changes the moment. It's a skill. It's a skill you just got to practice. So I'll sign off with that. But thanks for listening. I really appreciate it.
Awesome, man. Well, that's it, folks. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Thanks for coming on the show, Ben. It was a pleasure. I knew it was going to be interesting, and it certainly was. So everybody have a positive and productive day. Cheers.